But then I guess PTSD setting, it was like, this voice in my head.
Be careful, because that green only looks great in the company of other colors.
Colors, colors, colors. We all love colors, especially true when it comes to dials on watches. So on this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I feel about colored dials and some of the cautionary tales on when, if you are looking to purchase a watch with a color dial. So sit back, relax, have a coffee. The reason why I'm doing this particular episode, guys, is that during my after hours, scrolling through all of the watch feeds, as one would if you're a watch lover, I see this range of colored dials with these sort of stone dials by Baltic. I go, well, let's do an episode on colored dials on watches, because I have been wanting to buy a watch with these beautiful, fantastic colored dials for some time now. Yes, it was originally spurred up many, many, many years ago when Rolex released this beautiful tiger's eye dial, day date, you know, precious metal, the whole bling and shebang. That was the first time I really thought about having a watch with such mad colors. My very first real watch, well, my first watch that I bought in Switzerland with all the money I had was the Tag Heuer back in 2000. And that had a beautiful, vibrant blue dial. And at that time, that particular watch was already very much out there to the conventional watches of the time. Fast forward to during the pandemic years, Rolex released their myriad of Oyster Perpetual color dials, and everybody went bazonkers, right? You had the pinks, you had the Tiffany blues, the yellows, the reds. It was just so much fun, because I think we were all sort of caught up in the pandemic craze, and we were all sort of sleepy and dreamy, and everybody went mad. You know, the people were selling their grandkids. But I must say, as a bit of a footnote, watches of today, outside of the real high horology style type of watches, by and large, they're pretty mundane, boring, utilitarian type of watches. So recently I was on a business trip over in London, and I happened to have an afternoon off, so I went to the British Museum. If there ever was the biggest crime scene of thieving and robbery, go to the British Museum in London. Yes, I said it. I ended up at one section of a particular hall that was all about timepieces. Looking at the chronological order of how watches have evolved, you look at these earlier timepieces, the pocket watches, fair enough, they've got a lot of spaces to work with. Everything was intricate, everything was hand carved, everything was handmade. And then you sort of fast forward to 2024, yeah, sure, there's some very fantastic complications for, from JLCs of the world and what have you, but in terms of the aesthetics and design, we've really sort of gone very basic. So color dials has been on my radar for a while, and then I was thinking, well, you know what, a color dial is a color dial. I'll just scratch the itch and go buy a colored watch. And I did. For those of you who have been following our channel, thank you, by the way. I did go out and buy the Christopher Ward C63, which is the 36mm with a beautiful magenta, sort of purpley, pinky type of dial. Thinking back to the experience of that particular dial, I didn't find myself drawn to it after the initial sort of where to do the episode of that watch, because it's just so specific, isn't it? And in life, I think we want to wear things that's sort of a little bit less standoutish. You can wear a black watch, you can wear a Submariner on many occasions in many different settings, and it's one of those watches that never will offend anyone. And I fear for me, that is, if I choose to buy a color dial, I'm not going to get a lot of wear out of it, because the idea is always going to be better than the practical nature of that dial. So I've sort of shelved this color dial idea until recently into my European business trip. And then after London, I was in Germany. Again, I was walking through the streets and I find myself, inside a watch shop looking at different watches. In this particular shop, they had Union Glashütte, which is I guess, more of a budget style of German branded watches, and they had this beautiful range of color dials, the yellows, the greens, and the blues, very reminiscent of the Rolex solid color dials. So I walked into the shop and I tried on. Firstly, the size was a bit too large. I believe they were about 41 or 42. Had it been a 36 or even maybe a 38, I might have pulled the trigger on it. But what's funny about that, though, is that I originally saw the three colors. I think it was the blue, was a very unique blue. It was a yellow, and it was, I believe, a green. And I really wanted a yellow. And when I put the yellow on, I hated it. And I didn't know why. And I'm like, hang on a second. I really wanted this yellow dial, but yet on my wrist, it looked terrible. Why? Yellow looks great in the company of other colors, but on its own, it loses that magic. This is my sort of cautionary tale and sort of warning to you all who are thinking about a color dial is remember this, guys. When you look at these color dials on display with all the colors, you're like, oh, that one is the one I want. But be careful because your eyes and your mind will play tricks on you. Because the only reason why you're looking at that color because it's next to other colors that makes that color pop. But if you just buying that watch, that color on its own, it'll become, for me so far anyway, becomes very boring very quickly. So yeah, just the other day I'm scrolling through the feeds and I saw these Baltic watches. In true fashion, it's got the beautiful Baltic type of case and it's got this beautiful sort of, you know, mesh type of bracelet, which is very bright. And it had these beautiful three variety of stones in it. One I believe is an agate, the other one is a jade stone, and there was a third color. So I was like, oh, it's gonna get released in 2 days and so forth. It's a limited edition of 200 pieces. The blood rushes to the head and I'm like, maybe. And I was like, going for the green this time because the jade stone that really pops with that sort of stainless steel case with the beautiful mesh bracelet. I thought that is gonna be really cracker watch. But then I guess PTSD setting, it was like, this voice in my head.
Be careful because that green only looks great in the company of other colors.
And it wasn't cheap. Baltic watches are very expensive now. It was over 2,000 Australian dollars. Albeit it had, I believe, a Solita or an ETA movement. But it was a lot of watch because most of the parts, if not all of the parts, were made in China. Which, by the way, Baltic, I don't know why you wrote made in Hong Kong. Maybe it's just not cool to say made in China. Maybe it's cooler to say made in Hong Kong. I don't know, it's weird. Anyway, I guess the moral of the story for this episode, guys, just be careful when you want to buy a color dial. You really have to take a gamble on believing that you do really like that color on its own, on your wrist. It's one of those pebble in the shoe things. It's something that doesn't sit with you. You'll try to convince yourself the initial honeymoon period that you love it, but eventually you're gonna get bored with it. And believe me, after spending $2,500, nearly $3,000 on a Baltic with a color dial, you're gonna find yourself wearing it. And quickly enough, you're gonna find that, well, I wanna sell it. So on that bombshell,